Outer Orange.
Hello! Привет, welcome back. Today we are going over Orfist because he is best boy, and we finally got the mask stuff, and this deck definitely got like an upgrade. Deck's a little different than how I used to play. I wouldn't say it's like a massive difference, but the setup is a little bit different now. We got a bunch of cards that kind of helps the deck be more, consistent as well. We also got some trial deck cards that make this deck stronger. So today I'm going to basically talk about this deck and get started. Before that, I'll talk about sleeves. I got I forgot what these are called, but they're like Yu-Gi-Oh sleeves. I always forget the name of these, but these are Yu-Gi-Oh sleeves that I got from a friend, so that's what these are. Back, I think I've had the same backs on these sleeves on my Orfist deck since literally set 3 of Orfist. I think this is the Neo Nectar Girl. I don't remember, one of the people from one of the V Premium anime ones. So that's this, and then we're just using Dragon Shield matte sleeves on the top. So let's go ahead and get started with the ride line. Ride line, the starter could be whatever you want it to be. I tend to purposely do a different starter because it trips people a little bit. Don't know what deck I'm playing, so they'll just assume they just won't know, and I think that's just usually a good thing. You don't really want your opponent knowing exactly what deck you're playing, so usually giving away the starter is usually not the good thing, so I usually just don't. Next we have the Rotis, of course. Rotis says on place, just search for a world order added to hand. Ideally you want to search for, strange enough, in the past you used to want to search for the token order. I think nowadays you actually want to pick up the draw order. You want to go for this one nowadays. Next we have the Cubisaya. You can run Combine Rusher here, that's fine. I will say this deck got very heavy on CB, so it might not be optimal. You also draw a lot faster now, but I have seen a couple lists run Combine Rusher. I prefer this. This one says when you play in order, you get a 5k. Basically you want to put the 5k on him and make it harder to block. And you're not really going for a rush turn, but you still want your opponent to think about blocking your Vanguard, and if they choose to drop the cards, good. If they don't, then they're taking damage. So either way, it's good for you. That 5k does matter. We're not running a Thumperino as much and all that other stuff, so you don't have as many boosters accessible, but still I think the 5k is pretty important for that early play. And then we're our grade 3 for this ride line is Ragus still, so this part didn't change. Ragus has a couple skills. On place, you take an order from your drop zone, put it into your order zone, and it instantly activates. And then you also have the on swing. You can discard a card, and then for every 2 world orders he gets 5k, and then also you get to call a token for every 2 world orders, which is also very nice. His on place ability is pretty nuts, but now with the added mask stuff, this will definitely be not your main Vanguard anymore. You'll sometimes stay on him, but most likely you'll be going into the mask. Kind of just depends. If you're going second, you'll definitely probably use his on place ability, then instantly switch over. If you're going first, you can kind of stay on him for a turn and then switch over, but we'll talk about that part later. So speaking of the mask, let's go ahead and talk about the new Orfist that has come out. So of course you're going to run 4 copies in your main deck of this card. So just because he is pretty important, he's also really good, and yeah, he just does a lot of cool stuff. So he can only ride on Orfist cards, so just something to keep in mind. You can remove an Orfist from your hand, drop, or soul to activate his one of his abilities, which is you take a world order from your drop and you put it into order zone. This is pretty massive, and actually some people have been contemplating running extra copies of Orfist. I've seen a couple tops that had the extra Orfist in. I will say it's not a bad idea. Sometimes you do get stuck on this Orfist where you have like no orders, and I don't know, there are times, it doesn't happen too often, but sometimes you get stuck. So if you happen to draw into an extra copy, you can just like ditch it to fix that problem. I will say it doesn't happen too often. I think overall it's probably not the best idea to run more, but it has definitely been a thought, and I've definitely been testing it myself. The last effect, it says when he attacks, you can counterblast, put any number of world orders from your drop zone, from your order zone to your drop, and then call a Shadow Army tokens over units. Basically for the amount of world orders you send to your drop. And you have to, basically what you do is you have to call over cards that are on your board. So if you have cards on your board, you then call over them with Shadow Army tokens. And then finally he gets a drive if you basically put 2 or more. So after 2 he becomes a triple drive, which is really nice. So you can basically just do something like you can have two rear guards, you call over the token, you call over these rear guards after swing with them with tokens, and then he gets an extra drive on with that in mind. So that's basically it. You can go as crazy as like all 5, you can do 4. Ideally if you're going for lethal, 4 is like usually the best place to do it, but sometimes like 2 is fine and 3 is fine, right? So it just kind of depends on what your board state is and all that stuff. There are some cards that get effects when you call over them, so you also get some effects off of that. I think the hardest thing about this is the fact that you're moving orders from your order zone and putting them in your drop and getting them back into the order zone zone can be a little difficult depending on how you set up. I think that's the hardest part to learn about this deck. So we're gonna go into the orders first, because these orders are 3s and 2s anyway, and they're kind of just important. They're kind of part of the deck. Like, they're so essential that I think we should just might as well go over them. We're gonna start with the mask. So obviously, since we are running a Orfist with a mask in it, it's important to have mask in your deck. This is very crucial, as you'll be basically using this to ride over and activate persona as fast as possible, or if you just want to go straight into him, up to you. But basically, first abilities, top 5 for any dragon tree type unit or mask in its card name. It can't be itself. And then so the other effect is from drop. You can put this into soul if you reveal one of these right on top, and if your opponent's not greater or greater, you persona and draw a card, basically. So with that being said, that's just all the mask cards. That's just what mask decks do. You kind of need this. You do need to find this pretty quickly, so just something to keep in mind. None of the none of the cards that are Orfist related search for this, because these aren't world orders. So it's probably the clunkiest part of the deck, but it does work pretty smoothly to where it's not the end of the world. But just something to know, you usually want to run 2. There's no space for 3. You can put 3 in, but it's pretty hard. I recommend 2. I think 2 is a really good spot. And yes, I have the homie right here. I went to one of the BCSs where I actually opened him, and I was like, oh yay, I get to play both now. So that's what I'm doing here. 2 of the shadow. This is the one that buffs up the shadow army tokens. So Blast, if you Blast 2. And for every single one of these in the order zone, every time you call a shadow army token, they basically get extra 5k power. So if you have 2 in the order zone, you get 10k power. If you have 1, you get 5k power. It's for the turn they're called, by the way, so you have to keep recalling them, which is perfectly fine. The deck does a lot of that, so it's not really an issue, but that's something to keep in mind. I do run one of the In the Darkness Nobody Knows. This is a very old card, or old enough to where it hasn't really been run and it hasn't been seen for a while. Basically, its ability says, like, what's put in the order zone, you just Soul Blast, and you choose one of your opponent's front or rear guards and retire it. This part is really important. What's important is the name on it, and it's actually very crucial, because the reason why I bring this up is the trial deck card, this card right here, sometimes bricks you in the funniest ways. Those cards are the same, by the way, but it does have a little bit of an issue. It says when it's placed on the rearguard circle, if you have your Orfist card name, you Soul Blast and choose a world order different card name from the cards in your order zone, and you put it into the order zone. Now, sometimes what's going to happen is your order zone's already going to have all 3, or you'll be missing some. And you just won't have the condition, like maybe you'll just have too many of like this or something, and what happens is this card just whiffs, basically, and that's really bad, because as I mentioned earlier, you do not want your world, you don't want your order zone to be empty. You want to try to prevent it from being empty as much as possible. So because of this card, it's actually nice to have every single world order that's been printed, and honestly the front row retire is pretty nice too, because it just means less shot at intercepting. I will say against Bastion or Accord, this is like a dead card, but it's mainly Bastion and Accord we have to worry about it. There's also like Ava, of course, but Ava isn't like as popular, I feel like, so it's not the end of the world. Most other decks will have a front row that when you retire it, you're like, yay, I retired that. But there are a couple decks where this card's useless, and you're really just using it for the name specifically. And I do think this is important. I actually had this out for a while. I wasn't playing it, and then I found out that it's actually pretty important. And I've definitely had some games where I just sit there and go, oh, I just don't get the skill. That sucks, because I kind of need the skill. I'm like 1 order short or something, and it does happen. So I put this in. You can decide for yourself if you want it or not. Next, we run 3 of the Howling Moonlit Night. This was 4, with this being the 4th copy, but I do think that the 3 is perfectly fine. There are some times where I just don't want to keep doing this ability. Sometimes I just don't want to. Like, I actually prefer to do other stuff. So this is just, you search one out early on anyway, and you'll usually see the other one, so it's not a big deal. It is a replacer of itself. Like, you're basically using this ability to draw into something that's not itself. Early on, you want to go through these as much as possible, and then late game you go into the other ones. You want to see this pretty early too, so it's in your drop primarily, so that way you can put it into the order zone. But you want to see these in your order zone, so that way you can get rid of them, since they don't stack or do much of anything. All 4 of these cards don't stack or do much of anything. These are the best ones to remove with the mask skill. Honestly, all of them are good to remove with the exception of these 2. These are the 2 you want to stay as much as possible. You don't want to touch these at all, but sometimes it comes to a point where you have to touch them, so just something I keep in mind. And then last but not least, I have 2 of this one, which is funny. This card is always so essential. This is the Eclipse Moonlight, and it's kind of funny to see this go down, because this was like one of those cards that you usually want at higher amounts, but now it's lower. But this one says just Counterblast Call Toki when you play it. You usually want to play this one for free. Access to Soul is a lot easier than access to Counterblast in this deck, so you definitely want to just try and not use this one as much as possible. The rest are Soul reliant, but yeah, sometimes you actually run out of Soul too, because again, this card also requires a Soul, so something to kind of keep in mind in the back of your head. It does get a little risky. I have thought about running the Soul Charging Girl just because of this synergy going on here, but it's a thought for another day, I guess. But anyway, that's the orders. Nothing too crazy here. Just keep in mind of how you're keeping them in the order zone, what you're prioritizing. I think that's the hardest part to do as an Orfist player, is knowing where to prioritize, especially depending on what you're drawing, what your hand's looking like. If your hand's looking like crap, you usually always prioritize this. If your hand's looking kind of better, sometimes you go into these. And this is like just a backup plan, so just make sure you're not freaking that skill as much. So first we have the new guy. This is the trial deck card. Ever since this card came out, everyone's like, oh my god, Orfist got better, which is true, it did. This card's really nuts. We gotta talk about the first skill a little bit, but like I mentioned, on place a Soul Blast, you choose a wood order different from the one in order zone, put it into the order zone, which is really good. This basically sets up your order zone like really well. This is insane. It does have a second effect that's also really good, so this card's like a double whammy of goodness. The second effect says when it is put into drop from rear guard or by hand during your battle phase, if you have a Abyssal Dark or regular Knight, you may draw a card. So it does not answer, you don't have to draw, but basically that just says whenever you discard it during the battle phase, or if it's called over through like Orfist the Mask's ability, you just draw a card, which is really nice because you can put them in the front row and then they just get wiped and then you draw 2 cards basically. This card's insane. Like the on place is really good because you want to use it for the order stuff, and then the second ability is also really good because then you also draw off of it. So basically it replaces itself, it gives you orders, and it also sets up your game plan. Really good card, definitely a 4-0. There's no reason to not run this at 4 at all. This should be like a maxed out. So I read 2 of these. Now this slot's really interesting. This slot is also this guy. I'm having a hard trouble deciding if I want to run this at 4 or not, so I'm actually doing a 2-2 split right now. I'll get to this in a sec. This basically searches for an order, but it's a counterblast. This one searches for an order whenever you play an order, but it's a top 5. It also gets a little bit of power, which makes it kind of interesting, but this card is mainly just here to grab orders. It's a top 5 for an order versus a guarantee, but the difference between this card and the card I just showed you is that there's no counterblast on this card, which I think is very important to kind of keep in the back of your head. The reason why I'm saying this is because this deck does counterblast quite a lot. Running room for countercharge is very impossible because both the countercharges that work with this deck require you to remove something from the board, and as you read Mask doesn't really want you to remove stuff off the board. You can kind of play around with the one that retires tokens specifically. It's a countercharger. She's a little bit better because she says on attack or boost, you retire a token to countercharge, which is okay, but again, it's on attack or boost, and sometimes you need the CB before that, like you need it during main phase. And the other thing is that she also remove something from the board, which can be a little risky. You can remove something that's already been boosted and then just not call over anything there and be fine, but it is still a little weird. That being said, with the deck space and the tightness, it's hard to run counter treasures, so I thought maybe it's just better to run cards that just don't have counterblasts on them. And this is definitely one of them. Consistency wise, since this directly searches, this is better. However, I can't resolve this half the time. So that's the issue I have with this card, is that I can't resolve this. I can resolve this all game long. I can just, every single time I play an order, what's per turn? Cool. Top 5, I whiffed, cool, whatever. I'll just try next turn. Like, it's not a big deal. It also gets 5k, so you can early on kind of, you know, beat your opponent down a little bit if you want to, which is pretty nice. So that's basically the concept of this card. You're playing an order from hand. Make sure you call this card first and then play an order from hand, and because that way it'll see the condition and you can look at top 5. So very cool card. I really like it. All right, so this is the Elwith for Brandgate. This is the Dragon Tree Wrench. Basically, counterblast, Soul Blast, get a Dragon Tree marker, put it on something that doesn't have one yet. Search your deck for a mask and bring it to hand. This is super important as this gets you the mask order ASAP. You really need this because, again, you need the mask, so you need to want to see this pretty early. I will say 4 is kind of rough. I hate the fact that it's running stuff 4, but you need to see mask and nothing else directly searches for it, like literally nothing else. So this is the only card that directly says find the card, and sometimes you just need to find the card. You do not want to stand Ragus for more than like 1 turn. If you're stuck on Ragus for too long, you will probably lose the game, so you will eventually need to ride mask, and this is the card that says you can ride mask now. For 2 of these right now, like again, this is the same slot that those grade 2s are taking over. This one says on plays, if you have a Vanguard with Orfist in this card name, counterblast, search your deck for a road order and discard it. Shuffle your deck. So this directly gets you any order you want and you just discard it. It only goes to drop zone, something to keep in mind, so you do have to set up a little specifically with this. It's off with the Polarics pretty well. They work off each other. Use this effect to counterblast, get the order to drop, and then use this effect to send the order from drop to the order zone, which is very annoying, by the way, that they have to like use 2 cards just to get an order to the order zone. But hey, it works. It's free. It's free in quotations. Free as in like you get the thing, you do it, you get the effect. So it's pretty cool. You only have 1 counterblast and you don't have a mask, and you're also trying to attack with Orfist. Like, this is a counterblast, this is a counterblast, and this is a counterblast, and guess what? Your ride line's also a counterblast. So you have this issue that kind of comes up where you need all 5 of these cards to do their thing. This one you could probably skip out on. This one's needed. This one's needed if you don't have an order, and this one is needed. Like, these 3 are like very mandatory. That's 3 counterblasts are going through. So I'm not saying like it's bad or anything like that. I'm just saying you have to play very conservatively and kind of play out the player plays very importantly. You have to be very cautious with how you're playing all this out, because like if you don't have an order, this is probably priority, but then you lose pressure. But say you need the mask order because you want a superior ride into this, you know, you kind of need to think through, and I think it can be very hard here. This is a very tricky spot. Sometimes Orfist players get a little stuck sometimes, especially if your opponent kind of, you know, doesn't give you damage. It actually slows you down in a way, but then your lane can get stronger. So I know some people have been saying, oh, just rush down the deck. I don't know if rushing down the deck is a good idea, because this deck pops off like crazy off a counterblast. Like if you give them all the CB, they have all access to their whole deck, basically. You're basically giving them access to their whole deck. They'll unbrick like you know, within a second. So just something to kind of keep in mind. But if, you know, people are rushing, cool. I think if people are rushing, you could actually easily put this to 4. I don't know, sometimes it's a little hard. But next we have the PGs. It's your standard PGs. You can run the Elementaria in this slot. This is actually usually the one I always swap out. I always keep these 3 the same way. Then this one will either be Elementaria, Sanctitude, or be this card. I purposely do it like that just so I know exactly which card I'm constantly swapping out. Up to you, whatever you decide here. My triggers have stayed exactly the same with the exception of 1, but we got the 4 heals, 4 regular crits. I got the 2-2 split. Again, I think I've talked about this 100 times, but these can also just be regular crits. I will say this deck does though go through quite a bit, so actually using this is not terrible in here. I think this is one of the few times where I will say that this does come up. You will kind of want to use this a turn earlier if you know you're gonna run out of soul, and then you just you basically just play him, and then you have your soul for next turn. The next turn you'll call Polarix and be okay. But just something to keep in mind for soul management, this does come up more than other decks, but it is not the end of the world if you just don't have them, or if it's too expensive, or whatever the case is. You can just run vanillas and be fine. 3 draw triggers. I used to run 4, and then actually in the previous Regis decks, people even ran 5. I put it down to 3. Some people are in front, some are draws. I will say I think it's pretty 50-50. I think it's completely up to you how you decide you want to do it. I like seeing these early, and I don't care if I see them late game. Whereas fronts, I have this issue where if I see them early, they're useless, and then if I see them late game, they're good. So it's kind of just a weird kind of 50-50. I will say this deck bricks when it doesn't see what you want it to see, so I do utilize the draws, and I'm even having the grade 1 at 4, like even having this at 4, sometimes I'll still brick. And because of that, I just like the draws. I know it sucks like shield wise because this deck does have a shield issue as well, but I think you draw so much of your deck that it should be that much of an issue. But basically I run the draws because if I check them early, cool, now I'm seeing more of my deck. If I check them defensively, cool, I'm still drawing cards, and I can also use them as like little protectors since they are 10Ks, and 10Ks do help in some very specific situations. I will say the fronts are nice too because sometimes you need the 20K block, especially when you're going second into certain decks, or some decks that are just way too strong in terms of power level, so the fronts do come up. So this is a very hard argument. I think at the end of the day, it's up to you what you want to do. Got the over trigger, which is this bad boy right here. This OT is insane, especially in Brain Gate. Absolutely disgusting. With the triple drive now in mind, this thing goes like crazy. Your token, you're already attacking 5 times, and then you have this guy on top of that. If you go like crit OT, it's so disgusting. And this deck thins now a lot more than it used to between the grade 1 and you getting orders out and drawing cards. You have a very high likelihood of seeing this. You also have a higher likelihood of drawing into this too, by the way, so which is fine. It's 50K shield, right? So not the end of the world. But that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was fun, and I hope you're enjoying the deck too. I've been having a blast with this deck. I think it's really great. I definitely think people really underestimated this deck. When people first asked me about this, I was like, I really just don't know. I haven't tested it, but a lot of people were talking a lot of crap against this deck that thought it was really bad. It's definitely not the case. I will say the CB can be a little heavy, and it's definitely something to be cautious of, and that'll definitely differentiate between a good and bad player. I think healing is really massive. I think if you like use all your CB and then start healing like crazy, this deck just pops off even harder. You're basically just giving your opponent, like, you're basically giving the Orfist player like 5 more CB to work with, which is huge, by the way. Let me know below what you've been doing, if you've been playing Orfist or been playing other decks. Tell me how you feel. Tell me your thoughts and all that kind of fun stuff. Are you liking the new guy? I love the new guy. And any other thoughts you have about the deck. So don't forget to shop at 50cards.shop, code orange for all the goodies. You want this deck, I'm sure he has cards for that as well, for singles and stuff like that. So yeah, you can also build this deck using my code orange. Check out 50cards.shop, all that goodies. But anyway, peace out guys. That's with Anya. I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye.